Emma Wilson pulled a photograph from the estate sale box. Just another Victorian family portrait, she thought, until she enhanced the image and saw the child by the window. The photograph was from 1875, a prosperous white family in Charleston. Father, mother, 3 children, and fancy clothes. Typical stuff. But there in the background, half hidden by a curtain, stood a black child, maybe 6 years old, wearing plain, simple clothes, positioned like she was both there and not there at the same time. Emma zoomed in on her computer screen, and something about that child's face, the way she stood, it wasn't accidental. This was deliberate. Someone wanted this child in the photograph, but hidden enough to be deniable. Emma called her colleague, Marcus, the history professor. "I've got something strange here. 1875 Charleston family portrait with a black child in the background, 10 years after slavery ended. What am I looking at?" Marcus came over, studied the image, and said what Emma already suspected. "Domestic servant, probably. Or..." He paused, uncomfortable. These children were sometimes the biological offspring of the white men in the photos, the children of enslaved women who'd been forced into relationships with their enslavers. Emma felt sick. She started digging, found the photographer's mark, Thompson and Associates, Charleston, tracked down the family. William Mitchell, wealthy merchant and former plantation owner, his wife Catherine, their 3 legitimate children, and then she found her, the child in the window, Clara, born 1869 to a woman named Sarah, a woman who'd been enslaved by William Mitchell and continued working for him after freedom. Subscribe now and drop a comment. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything? But here's where it got wild. Emma found more records. Sarah's name kept appearing in strange places, church archives, legal documents, property records, and then buried in the Charleston Historical Society's uncatalogued boxes, a small leather journal, coded entries, unreadable at first, until Emma brought in a cryptographer. The journal was Sarah's, written in a code she'd developed because she couldn't let anyone find it while she was alive. And when they finally decoded those entries, when Emma read Sarah's words from 1869 to 1887, she had to sit down because her hands were shaking. This wasn't just a story about a woman who survived. This was a story about a woman who planned. Sarah's first entry, dated January 1870. "He thinks I have no power. He thinks because I cannot leave, because I have children to feed, because the law will not protect me, that I am still his property. He is wrong. I will teach him what it means to underestimate a woman who has already lost everything." Emma stared at that photograph again, at little Clara standing by the window, at William Mitchell sitting so proud and proper in the center, and suddenly she understood. That photograph wasn't documentation, it was a declaration. Sarah had insisted Clara be in that photo, positioned her deliberately, visible enough to be proof, hidden enough that Mitchell's pride wouldn't object in front of the photographer. Sarah was building a case, gathering evidence, and that photograph, that was just one piece of an 8-year plan that ended with William Mitchell dead, his empire destroyed, and Sarah walking away free. Hit that like button and comment below. What would you do if the law wouldn't protect you? Emma called Marcus back. "You need to see this journal. You need to see what Sarah did." And as she spoke those words out loud, as she realized the scope of what she'd uncovered, Emma knew she wasn't just restoring a photograph anymore. She was uncovering justice, the kind of justice that history books don't talk about, the kind that happens in shadows, executed by women who society taught to be invisible, but who were watching, learning, waiting, and when the moment came, they struck with a precision that would make military generals weep. Sarah wasn't a victim, Sarah was a weapon, and William Mitchell never saw her coming.
Emma spent weeks decoding Sarah's diary, and what emerged was a story that made her physically ill, a story of systematic cruelty dressed up as Southern hospitality. Sarah was born into slavery around 1837 on William Mitchell's rice plantation outside Charleston, and by age 25, she'd already been forced into a sexual relationship with Mitchell, bearing 3 children during slavery: Rachel in 1862, Thomas in 1860, Hannah in 1858, all property in Mitchell's ledgers, all denied as his children. Sarah wrote about those years in fragments. He came to the slave quarters whenever he wanted. His wife knew, everyone knew, but slavery made rape legal, made my children his property, made my body something he owned. When the Civil War ended in 1865, Sarah was 28 with 3 children and 0 options. Mitchell offered her a job on the plantation, starvation wages, impossible hours, a shack to live in, and Sarah took it because what choice did she have? Freedom on paper meant nothing when you had no money, no education, 3 mouths to feed, and the same white man who owned you yesterday was now your only employment option. But Sarah wasn't stupid. She watched other freed slaves try to organize, demand fair wages, buy their own land, and she watched Mitchell destroy them systematically. A black farmer named Samuel refused to sell his property to Mitchell in 1872. 2 weeks later, Samuel accidentally drowned in the river. No investigation, no questions, case closed. Sarah wrote, "I understood then. The war ended, but the war never ended. They just changed the words. Slavery became employment. Ownership became debt. And we were still dying." Then came 1869, the year that changed everything. Mitchell moved Sarah to his Charleston house as domestic servant, away from the plantation into his city mansion, and 3 months after she arrived, he raped her again. This time there was no slavery to hide behind. This was 1869. She was legally free. But who would believe her? Who would prosecute a wealthy white merchant for raping his black servant? Sarah wrote, "Clara was born in December. I held her and felt nothing but rage. Not at her, never at her, but at him, at the system that let him take my body again, at the wife who looked away, at the law that called me free while I was still his victim. I realized that night, if I wanted justice, I would have to create it myself." Between 1870 and 1875, Sarah became someone else entirely. On the surface, she was the perfect servant, obedient, quiet, efficient. Mitchell's wife, Catherine, even bragged about her to friends. "Our Sarah is so reliable, so devoted." But underneath, Sarah was studying Mitchell like a scientist studies a specimen, learning his routines, his business dealings, his secrets, his weaknesses. She befriended other black domestic workers, women who'd suffered similar fates, and through them she met Thomas Wright, a photographer's assistant who'd helped run the Underground Railroad before the war. And Wright introduced her to Robert Hayes, a black lawyer who was secretly documenting white men's crimes against freed slaves, building cases that couldn't be prosecuted yet, but would be someday. Sarah became their inside source on Mitchell. She couldn't read well, but Wright taught her. She memorized conversations, wrote them down later, discovered Mitchell was running a whole operation: fake debt contracts trapping black families, stolen land deeds, forged documents. And that accidental drowning in 1872? Sarah found letters proving Mitchell paid someone to kill Samuel. She stole documents from Mitchell's study, made copies, returned them before he noticed. And in 1875, when that photographer came to take the family portrait, Sarah made her first public move. She told the photographer, "Mr. Mitchell wants his complete household documented." And she positioned Clara in that window, deliberately, visible enough to be proof, hidden enough that Mitchell's arrogance wouldn't let him make a scene in front of a white photographer. That photograph was evidence, and Sarah knew one day she'd need it. But evidence wasn't enough. Sarah wanted more than exposure. She wanted Mitchell to suffer the way he had made her suffer, the way he had made her children suffer. And that's when she noticed the arsenic in his study, kept there for rats. And an idea began forming. Cold, calculated, perfect. Sarah spent the next 5 years becoming indispensable, and that was the genius of it. She didn't rebel, didn't rage, didn't give Mitchell any reason to suspect she was anything but the loyal servant he believed all black women should be. She cooked his favorite meals, pressed his suits perfectly, managed the household so smoothly that Catherine Mitchell told her friends, "I don't know what I'd do without Sarah. She practically runs this house." And Sarah smiled and nodded and wrote in her secret diary, "They think competence is loyalty. They think silence is acceptance. They have no idea I'm memorizing every word, documenting every crime, building a case that will bury them." Between 1875 and 1878, Sarah became Mitchell's wife's confidant, the only person Catherine could talk to about her suspicions, her humiliations, her knowledge that her husband had fathered children with enslaved women. Catherine would sit in her bedroom crying while Sarah brushed her hair, and Catherine would say things like, "You understand, don't you, Sarah? A wife must endure certain indignities for the sake of family reputation." And Sarah would murmur sympathetically while thinking, "You knew he was raping me. You knew about my children, and you did nothing. You're as guilty as he is." But Sarah never showed her rage, never let the mask slip, because she was gathering something more valuable than satisfaction. She was gathering leverage. She discovered Catherine kept a diary too, hidden in a locked drawer, and Sarah learned to pick that lock, read entries where Catherine admitted she knew about the children, knew about the violence, knew Mitchell had murdered that black farmer, all written down in her own handwriting. Sarah made careful notes, dates, details, exact quotes, everything Hayes would need for court. Meanwhile, Thomas Wright had positioned himself at the photography studio, learning the trade, becoming respected, and he was taking photographs of other families too, documenting more children hidden in backgrounds, building a pattern of evidence that would show this wasn't isolated, this was systematic. Wealthy white men all over Charleston fathering children with black women and denying them. The 1875 photograph of Clara became part of a larger archive, dozens of images, all with coded information. Wright developed a system, hand positions, where people stood, how curtains were arranged. Each photograph was testimony frozen in time. And Sarah? She was learning about poison. She borrowed medical books from Mitchell's library when he wasn't home, studied symptoms of arsenic poisoning, learned that it mimicked natural illness, learned the dosage that would kill slowly versus quickly, learned how to make a man suffer for months before death finally came. She practiced on the rats Mitchell claimed the arsenic was for, tested different amounts, different delivery methods, took notes like she was conducting scientific research, because that's exactly what she was doing. By 1878, Sarah had everything she needed. Stolen documents proving Mitchell's land fraud and involvement in Samuel's murder. Catherine's diary admitting knowledge of crimes. Photographs documenting dozens of denied children. A network of witnesses ready to testify. And a poison that would make Mitchell's death look like mysterious illness while he suffered every single day. Hayes told her, "We can prosecute with what we have. We can destroy his reputation, recover some land for families." But Sarah shook her head and said something that made Hayes go quiet. She said, "Reputation isn't enough. I want his life. I want him to die knowing I won, knowing the woman he thought he owned, the woman he raped twice, the woman he forced to serve his family while denying her children. I want him to die knowing she killed him." And Hayes, looking at this woman who'd survived everything Mitchell threw at her, who turned survival into strategy, could only nod and say, "Then let's make sure he knows."
January 1880, Sarah began the poisoning, and she did it with the calm precision of someone who'd been planning this moment for a decade. She started with tiny amounts, just enough arsenic in Mitchell's morning coffee to make him feel slightly ill. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious, just a general weakness, a persistent headache, a stomach that wouldn't settle. Mitchell complained to doctors. They diagnosed stress and overwork, told him to rest more, eat better, and Sarah nodded sympathetically and brought him special meals, meals she'd carefully prepared with just a bit more poison each time. By March, Mitchell was noticeably sick, losing weight, struggling to work, spending more time in bed. Doctors were baffled. They tested for everything: tuberculosis, typhoid, heart disease. Nothing made sense.
Catherine was worried, constantly hovering, asking Sarah, "What do you think is wrong with them?" And Sarah would say gently, "Perhaps it's God's will, ma'am. Perhaps Mr. Mitchell is being tested." And Catherine would nod, never suspecting that God's will had Sarah's hands. Sarah's diary entry from April 1880, "He asked me today to pray for him. Me, the woman he raped, the woman whose children he denied. He asked me to pray for his recovery. I told him I pray for him every single day, and I do. I pray he suffers exactly as long as I did. I pray he feels every bit of pain he caused. I pray his last breath is full of the same fear my children felt being treated as invisible." By March, Mitchell was bedridden. His skin had a grayish tint, his hands shook, he couldn't keep food down. The family was in crisis. Business partners were circling, wondering if they should prepare for his death. And through it all, Sarah was there, the faithful servant, bringing water, adjusting pillows, wiping his fevered forehead, and adding just enough poison to keep him dying slowly. But Sarah wasn't just killing Mitchell, she was executing the legal attack simultaneously. In May 1880, while Mitchell was too sick to pay attention, Hayes began filing lawsuits, quietly at first, one black family at a time, reclaiming stolen property. Mitchell's business partners tried to fight back, but they were scattered, disorganized. They didn't realize this was coordinated. Then, in July 1880, Hayes dropped the real bomb, a massive lawsuit representing 23 black families, presenting 8 years of documented evidence: Mitchell's forged debt contracts, his role in Samuel's murder, his systematic land theft, and the photographs. Dozens of photographs showing children hidden in the backgrounds of wealthy white families, including Clara, in the Mitchell family portrait. The judge initially dismissed it. "This is circumstantial. This is an attack on a dying man's reputation." But Hayes stood up and said something that stopped the courtroom cold. "Your Honor, this dying man is dying because God is just, and these families deserve their property back before his death allows his crimes to be buried with him." Mitchell's associates panicked. They knew if this case succeeded, they'd be next, so they started turning on each other, trying to make deals. "Mitchell forced us to participate. We were afraid of him. We have evidence against him if you'll protect us." And just like that, the whole network started collapsing. Meanwhile, in August 1880, Mitchell was in his final days, barely conscious. Family gathered around his bed, and Sarah brought him his evening tea. The family was in the parlor, giving them privacy for one last moment with the faithful servant. And Sarah sat beside him, leaned close, and whispered, "Mr. Mitchell, can you hear me? It's Sarah. I want you to know something before you die. This illness, it's not God's judgment, it's mine. I've been poisoning you for 8 months. The same arsenic you kept in your study, the same poison you probably used on others. I've been feeding it to you every single day, and you never noticed. You never suspected, because you never saw me. You thought I was invisible. You thought I was nothing, but I was everything. I was your cook, your servant, your victim, and now I'm your killer. You're dying because of me. And when you're gone, your empire dies too. I've made sure of it. Hayes has all the evidence. Your name will be destroyed. Your children will inherit shame. And Clara, our daughter, the child you denied, she'll inherit money I've secured through blackmail and legal manipulation. She'll live free while your legitimate children live with your disgrace. This is justice, Mr. Mitchell. This is what happens when you underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose." Mitchell's eyes went wide. He tried to speak, tried to call out, but his voice was gone, his body too weak. Sarah smiled, placed the poison tea in his hand and said, "Drink up, sir. Doctor's orders." And Mitchell, too confused and weak to resist, drank it down, his final dose. And Sarah walked calmly out of the room, told the family, "He's resting peacefully now." And by morning, William Mitchell was dead. The funeral was massive. Hundreds of people attended William Mitchell's burial in August 1880. Charleston's elite gathered to mourn one of their most respected citizens. Newspapers ran obituaries praising his business acumen, his civic contributions, his role in Charleston's post-war recovery. and Sarah stood in the back, wearing black, playing the grieving servant, and inside she was laughing. Because while they buried Mitchell with honors, Hayes was in court systematically destroying everything Mitchell had built. Within 2 weeks of the funeral, the legal avalanche began. Hayes presented Catherine Mitchell's own diary as evidence, entries where she admitted knowing about her husband's crimes. William insists on certain arrangements I find uncomfortable, the children from his relations with the help, the business dealings that seem improper. Catherine broke down on the witness stand, admitted she'd known about Sarah, about Clara, about the murdered farmer, about everything. Said she stayed silent because that's what wives did back then. And the judge looked at her with disgust and said, "Silence makes you complicit, Mrs. Mitchell." The verdict came in October 1880. 23 black families received their land back. Mitchell's business partners were arrested for fraud and conspiracy to murder. And here's the beautiful part. The part that made Sarah actually smile for the first time in years. Clara received an inheritance. Not from Mitchell directly. Oh no, Sarah had been smarter than that. She'd spent years blackmailing Mitchell's business partner, a man named James Burton, who'd also fathered children with black women and denied them. Sarah had evidence of his crimes too. So Burton, terrified of exposure, had set up a charitable trust that just happened to benefit Clara Morrison. $5,000. Enough to buy property, start a business, live independently, and Burton couldn't say a word about where that money really came from without incriminating himself. Sarah had secured Clara's future using the same system that tried to destroy them, turned their weapons against them, and nobody could prove she'd done anything illegal. But Sarah's victory came with a cost. In 1887, 7 years after Mitchell's death, Sarah started getting sick, the same symptoms Mitchell had: weakness, nausea, weight loss, and she knew immediately what was happening. Someone was poisoning her. She found out later it was one of Mitchell's associates, a man named Thomas Crawford, who'd gone to prison because of her testimony. His brother was seeking revenge, and Sarah, tired, worn down by years of fighting, decided not to fight back. She'd already won everything that mattered. Clara was free, the families had their land, Mitchell's name was destroyed. What more was there? Sarah's final diary entry, written 3 days before her death in November 1887, "They found me out. One of them figured out I killed Mitchell, and now they're killing me the same way." Poetic, I suppose, but it doesn't matter. I won. Clara has money, education, options, something I never had. The families are free. Mitchell's empire is ashes. I die knowing I was never their property. I was their nightmare. And I'd do it all again. Every poisoned meal, every stolen document, every lie I told while smiling, because sometimes the only way to get justice is to take it. And I took everything. Sarah died at age 50. Official cause listed as pneumonia. But Emma's research revealed the truth. She'd been murdered in retaliation. But even in death, Sarah won, because Crawford's brother was eventually caught and hanged for poisoning 3 other people. His confession included Sarah, and the scandal reignited the Mitchell case, reminded Charleston that their respected families were built on rape, theft, and murder. Clara lived until 1924. And thanks to Sarah's inheritance, she didn't die in poverty like history first recorded. Emma found property deeds showing Clara owned her boarding house outright. She ran a successful laundry business. She never married, never had children of her own, but she helped dozens of black women escape abusive employers, taught them to read, gave them jobs. She became what Sarah had been, a protector. When Clara died at 55 of tuberculosis, she left her property to a black women's shelter, and her will included one line that made Emma cry. "My mother, Sarah, taught me that freedom isn't given, it's taken. And once you take it, you defend it,